Hello friends, this is Mike Williams. The following presentation investigates the Beatles' Let It Be period to get a better understanding of the band's dynamics and whether Peter Jackson's new film Get Back is historically accurate or is it revisionist history made possible by the advancement of film technology 51 years after the original Let It Be film was released. We will take a look at the alleged 56 hours of unseen footage, and to do this, we will revisit the history of the original Let It Be film from 1970 in order to establish the historical baseline. As I move along, I will call out the numerology to show how the numbers are intentionally embedded and part of the occult magic around Billy and the Beatles. I will then discuss the possibility of Peter Jackson utilizing advanced techniques like deep fake and CGI-based technology to create a fictional storyline around his film Get Back. Then I will briefly discuss how there are other major deliverables coming together in a short period of time, which could mean Billy is wrapping up his McCartney role and going out with a ticker tape parade as he is recognized for his efforts on behalf of the social engineering psyop known as the Beatles. But before I move to the first slide, please note this presentation is about the Beatles and the McCartney conspiracy. So if this topic is not your cup of tea or it makes you upset, I highly recommend clicking the stop button and moving on to content that better aligns with your beliefs about who and what the Beatles were and continue to be. I would also like to thank those of you who forwarded information which helped to compile this presentation. Let's move to the first slide and begin the analysis. Events around the Beatles and Billy always have embedded occult numbers. The typical numbers we see over and over again are 3, 6, 9, 11, 33, 66, 99, 666, and 999. When Billy is in his McCartney role, the number 9 is present. When he is himself as William, he associates with the number 6. However, as Billy gets closer to bringing his McCartney character to a close, we are also seeing the numbers 7 and 10. 7 is a number representing enlightenment, and 10 represents completion and new beginnings. The numbers 3, 6, and 9 are very important within occult circles because 3, 6, and 9 are considered powerful numbers in the creation and existence of the universe and represent higher dimensional energy influencing other numbers. Nikola Tesla was quoted as saying, "If you only knew the magnificence of the 3, 6, and 9, then you would have the key to the universe." As we can see, 3, 6, and 9 are rooted in the number 3. Whenever we multiply 3 by 1, 2, 3, and so on, the result is the 3, 6, 9 pattern. We have the same outcome with the number 6, except the sequence is 6, 3, 9. The number 9 is very interesting because no matter what number we multiply 9 by, the result always reduces to the number 9. This is why 3, 6, and 9 are considered powerful numbers and influence other numbers. In the next slide, we will see how 3, 6, and 9, especially 3, is very important in the release of Peter Jackson's Get Back. This narrative about the Get Back movie comes to us from thebeatles.com. I will read through the entire press release and emphasize the wording underlined in red. On the next slide, I will offer my interpretation of the underlined words and what I believe is being expressed in an encoded or layered way. The release begins by saying, over 6 hours of never-before-seen restored footage, including the Beatles' last live performance, to roll out on Disney Plus over 3 days, November 25th, 26th, and 27th of 2021. The Walt Disney Studios, Apple Corps Ltd., and Wingnut Films Productions Ltd. announced today that Disney Plus will bring The Beatles Get Back, a Disney Plus original documentary series directed by Peter Jackson, to fans and music lovers worldwide. Because of the wealth of tremendous footage Peter Jackson has reviewed, which he has spent the past 3 years restoring and editing, The Beatles Get Back will be presented as 3 separate episodes. Each episode is approximately 2 hours in length, and please note, 2 hours in length times 3 episodes equals 6. The series will roll out over 3 days, November 25th, 26th, 27th of 2021 exclusively on Disney+. As a huge Beatles fan myself, I am absolutely thrilled that Disney Plus will be the home for this extraordinary documentary series by the legendary filmmaker Peter Jackson, said Bob Iger, Executive Chairman and Chairman of the Board for the Walt Disney Company. This phenomenal collection of never-before-seen footage offers an unprecedented look at the close camaraderie, genius songwriting, and indelible impact of one of the most iconic and culturally influential bands of all time, and we can't wait to share the Beatles' Get Back with fans around the world. Peter Jackson commented, "In many respects, Michael Lindsay Hogg's remarkable footage captured multiple storylines. The story of friends and of individuals. It is the story of human frailties and of divine partnership. It is a detailed account of the creative process with the crafting of iconic songs under pressure set amid the social climate of early 1969. But it is not nostalgia. It's raw, honest, and human. Over 6 hours, you'll get to know the Beatles with an intimacy that you never thought possible." He added, "I'm very grateful to the Beatles, Apple Corps, and Disney for allowing me to present this story in exactly the way it should be told. I've been immersed in this project for nearly 3 years, and I'm very excited that audiences around the world will finally be able to see it." Directed by 3-time Oscar-winning filmmaker Peter Jackson, who also directed the Lord of the Rings trilogy, The Beatles' Get Back takes audience back in time to the band's intimate recording sessions during a pivotal moment in music history. The documentary showcases the warmth, camaraderie, and creative genius that defined the legacy of the iconic foursome, compiled from 60 hours of unseen footage shot in January 1969 by Michael Lindsay Hogg, and more than 150 hours of unheard audio, all of which has been brilliantly restored. Jackson is the only person in 50 years to have been given access to these private film archives. The Beatles' Get Back is the story of John Lennon, Paul McCartney, George Harrison, and Ringo Starr as they plan their first live show in over 2 years, capturing the writing and rehearsing of 14 new songs originally intended for release on an accompanying live album. The documentary features, for the first time in its entirety, the Beatles' last live performance as a group, the unforgettable rooftop concert, as well as other songs and classic compositions featured on the band's final 2 albums, Abbey Road and Let It Be. The Beatles' Get Back is being made with the enthusiastic support of Paul McCartney, Ringo Starr, Yoko Ono Lennon, and Olivia Harrison. Ahead of the documentary's Disney Plus debut, Apple Corps Ltd/Callaway Arts and Entertainment will release the Beatles' Get Back book on October 12th. Beautifully designed and produced, the 240-page hardcover complements the Get Back documentary with transcriptions of the Beatles' recorded conversations and hundreds of exclusive, never-before-published photos from the 3 weeks of sessions. The collectible book will be published in 9 international language editions, including English. And that's the end of the article. For those that follow my work, you probably have heard me refer to the official Beatles narrative as the Cinderella story. And here we have Peter Jackson's Get Back being released by Disney, who is known for films having to do with fantasy, imagination, and make-believe. In other words, Disney makes fictional tales, and one of their most famous is Cinderella. Throughout the wording, we see the numbers 3, 6, 9, 10, and 11. The dates of November 25th, 26th, and 27th are encoded with the numbers 9, 10, and 11. For example, November 25th is calculated by taking the numerical value of November, which is 11, and adding it to the 25th day. When we add 11 plus 25, we get 36, and 3 plus 6 equals 9. The same math applies with November 26th and 27th. The 3 dates are telling an embedded story. The number 9 means transformation, change, and therefore endings, which then leads to the number 10, or the number of completion and new beginnings. And of course 10 leads to 11, which is a master number in the occult and represents spiritual enlightenment, as well as the twin pillars of Freemasonry, Joachim and Boaz. So Billy is closing out his McCartney role and beginning a new quest or journey, which will take him to a place of enlightenment and illumination. As I explained in my Decoding McCartney 3 presentation, the number 10 in Billy's case might represent his passing, and the number 11 is his journey to the spirit world. The number 14 seems out of place until we understand that 14 reduces to 5, which has the attributes of nonconformance, operating outside the norm, and not being traditional. The Beatles were a social engineering initiative designed by Tavistock to uproot traditional values and to help bring about worldwide cultural change as part of the Aquarian conspiracy and the cult of Dionysus, or Luciferianism. It should be noted, with the exception of A Hard Day's Night, which had 13 songs, all of the Beatles' other official UK albums, starting with Please Please Me Through Revolver, contained 14 songs. All numbers have positive and negative attributes. The negative aspects of the number 5 would be the emergence of challenges and difficulties. 14 can also be representative of double sevens, since 7 plus 7 equals 14. From 1962 through 1966, the Beatles released 7 studio albums, which contained 77 original songs and 97 total songs when we add in the cover songs from each album. 97 is 9 plus 7, which reduces to 16, and 1 plus 6 equals 7. The name The Beatles also has numerology of 7. 777 is known as the lightning flash of creation through the Kabbalah tree of life and has connections back to Aleister Crowley. Speaking of Crowley, we see the Get Back book will be released on October 12th, which is Aleister Crowley's birthday. This is the same day the new Memoirs box set is also being released. The book also has 240 pages, and of course, 2 plus 4 equals 6. The notion that the Beatles were a, quote, divine partnership appears to be referencing the enlightenment and illumination through the tenets of the Luciferian cult of Paulism. Paulism is a religion embedded within the Beatles and Beatle worship, where biological Paul is a graven Christ figure who died and then resurrected through Billy. There is a link in the description box if you would like to learn more about the concept of Paulism. We are told the movie is not, quote, nostalgia and presents the story exactly the way it should be told. Nostalgia harkens back to our memories. What do we remember? Do we remember the Let It Be period being a happy time for the Beatles? That's not my recollection. The historical record, including the original film, tells us quite clearly it was an acrimonious time period for the band. So the Get Back narrative is telling us to forget about what you know and let's now believe in something different. Let's enter into the realm of imagination. We are told the film is a, quote, story and being presented the way it should be told. As it should be told by whom? Well, by the storyteller, of course. Notice the wording does not say as events actually happened. Then we read the phrases, quote, never before seen, unseen footage, remarkable footage, and never before published. We have to ask ourselves this question. How is it possible that 56 hours of footage from the most iconic rock band of all time was sitting in a vault, unseen, and none of this remarkable footage made its way into the original film? How is such a premise even remotely possible? Maybe it's because the 56 hours didn't actually exist, and I will dig more into this theory later in the presentation. The last point I want to make has to do with the wording, quote, crafting iconic songs under pressure. Notice the word crafting is used instead of writing or composing. The word craft is also a term associated with Freemasonry, and the wording telling us the Beatles were, quote, under pressure sounds to me a lot like the Rubber Soul narrative, where we are told the lads were under pressure to write, rehearse, arrange, and record 16 songs in 30 days, which I have shown to be a fictional telling of how Rubber Soul was created in my presentation, Did the Beatles Write All Their Own Music? A link to that analysis is in the description box below. Let's move to the next slide. Another quirky set of numbers is whether the number of hours of, quote, unseen footage is 55, 56, or 60. Are the different numbers coincidental? No, they are not. They are intentional. From the site Get Back the Beatles, we are told Peter Jackson's documentary will re-examine the sessions using over 55 hours of unreleased original 16mm footage filmed by Michael Lindsay Hogg in 1969, now restored, and 120 hours of mostly unheard audio recordings. The narrative goes on to say that the book will feature many unseen high-resolution film frames from the same restored footage. Another source, IndieWire.com, quotes Jackson as saying, "And it's really great stuff," which pulls from 56 hours of never-before-seen Beatles footage. And then, from Beatles.com, compiled from over 60 hours of unseen footage shot in January 1969 by Michael Lindsay Hogg, and more than 150 hours of unheard audio, all of which has been brilliantly restored. So 55, 56, and 60 hours. Which is it? Well, it's all of the above, and here's why. 55 plus 56 plus 60 equals 171. And when we add 1 plus 7 plus 1, we get 9. We get the same results when we take the full reductions of 55, 56, and 60, which is represented by 10 plus 11 plus 6, which sums to 27, and 2 plus 7 equals 9. Coincidence? I don't think so, but you can decide for yourself. The director of the original Let It Be film was Michael Lindsay Hogg, who in Wikipedia is Sir Michael Lindsay Hogg, 5th Baronet. He is an American-born British television, film, music video, and theater director. He directed promotional films for the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, with both bands tying back to Tavistock. Some of his early promo films include Paperback Writer, Rain, Hey Jude, and Revolution, and the Rolling Stones' 2,000 Light Years from Home, Jumping Jack Flash, and Child of the Moon. Lindsay Hogg was hired by the Beatles to direct a film, which later became Let It Be. Originally conceived as a television special, Get Back was to feature footage of the Beatles recording a new album and rehearsing for a concert appearance. However, the sessions were extremely acrimonious, and the film and the album were shelved for a time following the Beatles' rooftop concert in January 1969. The Beatles returned to the project and released the newly retitled Let It Be along with an album of the same name, and of course this was in 1970. Lindsay Hogg continued directing music videos throughout the 1970s, including many for the Rolling Stones and Paul McCartney and Wings. So isn't it interesting that within Michael Lindsay Hogg's bio, the original Let It Be sessions in 1970 are described as extremely acrimonious. Acrimony is defined as bitter, sharp animosity, especially as exhibited in speech or behavior. Let's keep this in mind as we move along. Of course, no Beatle project would be complete without numbers, especially the master number 11. Filming of the original Let It Be film began on January 2, 1969, and completed with the rooftop concert on January 30th for a total of 29 days. 2 plus 9 equals 11, and we have the master number once again. What is also interesting, if we look at the call-out box at the lower right-hand side of the slide, we can see the number of seconds and minutes over the 29 days sums to 9. The number of hours within the 29 days is 696. Because the numbers 6 and 9 can be flipped or inverted in the occult, we get the 666 or the 999 signature as well. Now let's learn more about the original Let It Be film. The source for this information is Wikipedia. Let It Be is a 1970 British documentary film starring the Beatles and directed by Michael Lindsay Hogg. The film documents the group's rehearsing and recording songs in January 1969 for their 12th studio album, Let It Be. The film was released in May 1970, just after the album. Let It Be is the final original Beatles film release. The film, Let It Be, has not been officially available on home video since the 1980s, although original and bootleg copies of the film still circulate. Early attempts to release the film on DVD and Blu-ray did not come to fruition. The Beatles Get Back, an upcoming 2021 documentary utilizing footage filmed for Let It Be, will be followed by a remastered re-release of the original 1970 film. The songs in the film are works in progress, with discussions among the band members about ways to improve them. Wikipedia then tells us, McCartney dominates the proceedings while his band size Harrison's guitar part on Two of Us, and a mildly tense conversation takes place between them. McCartney says, quote, I always hear myself annoying you, and tells Harrison this is not his intention. Harrison responds that McCartney no longer annoys him, and that he, Harrison, is content to play what McCartney wishes or to not play at all. On January 30th, the Beatles and Billy Preston played on the rooftop in the cold wind for 42 minutes, about half of which ended up in the film. And please note, 42 minutes, 4 plus 2 equals 6. Initial reviews of the film were generally unfavorable. Critics took issue with the film's technical and conceptual qualities. The British press was especially critical. To offer my own editorial, when I was a teenager, Let It Be played at a local theater for a long time with midnight showings. I remember the film being persistently dark from a lighting perspective. I also own a copy of the film on DVD, and the dim lighting is exactly as I remembered. In fact, I will include some stills from my DVD so you can take a look for yourself. Overall, I thought the movie lacked cohesiveness, with the Beatles looking bored and disinterested through most of the film. For me, the highlight of the movie was the rooftop scene, but I also view the film as part of the historical record documenting the demise of the band. Now let's read what some of the film critics had to say back in the day. As mentioned earlier, critics took issue with the film's technical and conceptual qualities. The British press was especially critical, and remember, the original film was shot in 16mm. We will circle back to this in an upcoming slide. Leonard Maltin, a movie critic, rated the film 3 out of 4 stars, calling it, quote, uneven and draggy, but, quote, rescued by the Beatles' music. Owen Gleiberman of Variety considered the film to be, quote, extraordinary, stating it was grainy and moody and desultory. Now the definition of desultory, marked by lack of definite plan, regularity, or purpose, not connected with the main subject, disappointing in progress, performance, or quality. It does seem odd that Gleiberman described Let It Be as both extraordinary and desultory, but let's keep in mind his description of the film being grainy, as this was the result of blowing up the film from 16mm to 35mm for theatric release. Michael Lindsay Hogg, the director of Let It Be, told Entertainment Weekly in 2003 that reception to Let It Be within the Beatles camp was, quote, mixed. He believed Paul McCartney and Lennon both liked the film, while Harrison disliked it because, quote, it represented a time in his life when he was unhappy. It was a time when he very much was trying to get out from under the thumb of Lennon and McCartney. Michael Lindsay Hogg's explanation is bolstered by the fact that after George's argument with Billy during Let It Be, George walked out of the sessions on January 10th and returned on January 15th, so he was gone for 5 days. And going back to the Wikipedia entry about Michael Lindsay Hogg, we are told the sessions were extremely acrimonious. Now let's take a moment and watch and listen to 2 exchanges in the film. The first is the argument between Billy and George, and the second clip is Billy talking to John, and notice the total lack of interest and apathy from Lennon. where during the conversation, Lennon says absolutely nothing. And watch John's body language as well. It's very telling.
You know, we've just gone around like for an hour with nothing in our heads, just the riffs. There's no riffs. I mean, it's enough to get what you you and I are on memories. But it's not together, so that it's not sounding together, so we can even on play it until we... Or we can stop and say it's not together.
If we had a tape recorder now and just taped down and played it back, you'd throw that out straight
Yeah,
away.
right. But
no,
it's like it's complicated now. So see if we can get it simpler and then complicate it where it needs complications. But it's complicated in the bit. But even no, I mean,
I'll play just the chords if you like. And then that's what I'm trying to do.
I'm trying to help you, but I always hear myself annoying you, and I'm trying to. I get so annoying. But you know what I mean? I know, but you know.
Because it'll take even longer.
Look, I'm not trying to say that. I'm not trying to say that. You're doing it as though I'm trying to say that. And what we said the other day, I'm not trying to get you. But I really am trying to just say, look, lads, the band, should we try it like this?
It's funny that how it only occurs when we put
I know if this one is like, should we play guitar through Hey Jude? Well, I don't think we should.
Yeah, okay, well, I don't mind. I'll play, whatever you want me to play. Or I won't play at all if you don't want me to play. No, whatever it is that will please you.
Because, whenever we talk about it, we have certain rules, like George saying, what do you want to do? And he says, no films. But it's wrong, though. It's very wrong, though, because you don't know. He says, what he means is no help hard days, not, And I agree, But no films, because this is a film. And he now doesn't mind this, But it's that kind of thing, like no TV shows, no audience. But, I mean, see, it's like, when we came back from Hamburg and did Leicester de Montfort Hall, or wherever it was, Coventry, we played the ballroom and we had the worst first night thing and we were all nervous and it was terrible. And we played another the next night. It got a little bit better. Next night, and then the next night, it was just too much. We were playing because we got over the hang of audience. It was just like there was no one there, but it was a new sort of thing, and there was some fella in the front watching how you're playing. We were just right into it. And those will have been, if you could have recorded those things, they will have been the greatest, because it's like Mal was saying, it's that bounce thing, And we're good at that, once we get over the nervousness. But it's like there's the hurdle of that nervousness is there now. So that, when we can't get over it now, unless we really sort of, go to the Albert Hall and get in a black bag, See, and then the only other alternative to that is to say, well, we won't ever do it to an audience again, But if we intend to keep any kind of contact on that scene, I do understand George just saying, well, there's no point, because it is like where Stravinsky, and it's in the music, and he doesn't sort of get up and play his Joanna for them anymore,
So we can see from the two clips that there was tension, frustration, and apathy during the Let It Be sessions. And the clips, in my opinion, represent a general tone that permeates the film. Of course, there were lighter moments in the movie, but the overall mood of Let It Be was not uplifting. It did not depict an upbeat and inspired band. Instead, it portrays a group of guys, at least 3 of them, that were tired of the routine. The fact is, the tension within the group goes back to the Sgt. Pepper sessions, where Billy tells us in memoirs that John, George, and Ringo were not happy with the rigor and long hours that Billy demanded of them in the studio. In the book, he tells us that during the 1962 through 1966 period, the lads were accustomed to going into the studio to do what they needed to do and then leave. As many of you who follow my work know, my position is their role in the studio was to lay down the vocal tracks only. They wrote very little, if any, of the songs during this period, nor did they play on the official recorded album tracks. The songs were written by professional songwriters under the direction of Theodore Adorno and George Martin, and session musicians were used to record the music. Starting with Sgt. Pepper, John and George contributed more to the songwriting as well as playing on some of the tracks, but their participation and contributions increased with the White Album. However, even during the 1967 through 1970 period, Billy, who was running the band, utilized outside songwriters and studio musicians to round out the song content for the albums. In fact, in memoirs and mainstream articles, we find out that Billy would either redo guitar tracks recorded by John or George, or simply lay down the tracks himself because he was either not satisfied with what they played, or he bypassed them altogether and just did the tracks himself. I have a clip of Billy, which I will play in a moment, where he's being interviewed by Bernie Goldberg, and states George did not show for most of the Pepper sessions. So if George wasn't there, who played the guitar tracks? The long hours, the discipline, and Billy's propensity to be a perfectionist wore on the other three Beatles, and this created tension. Now, that's not to say they didn't have fun moments. Of course they did. But the working relationship had definite ups and downs, and this dynamic existed throughout the 67 to 70 period, which includes the filming of Let It Be in 1969. Wikipedia tells us the disunity became most evident with the White Album. During those sessions, Ringo left for a time, as did George Martin, who we are told in the Beatles' Bible spontaneously left to go on holiday, leaving his assistant Chris Thomas to produce the group, and that the Beatles found themselves essentially working alone with EMI engineers. And as I mentioned earlier, George Harrison left the Get Back or Let It Be sessions for 5 days after the argument with Billy. We are told one of the factors contributing to the breakup was the band's resentment towards McCartney for his perceived domineering role. Another contributing factor, as told by the mainstream press, was Lennon's heroin addiction that began in mid-1968 and continued through the Let It Be sessions. One has to ask the question, how does a heroin addict prolifically write and record songs? This is another red flag. Either the heroin addiction story is not true, or someone else was plugging the hole on behalf of John. The mainstream narrative states George had become very disenchanted with the Beatles because they, especially the Lennon and McCartney setup, was stifling his creativity and ability to break out on his own. We are also told Apple was floundering and in financial trouble, which led to managerial disputes and organizational concerns. Once we understand the history a little better, it becomes a lot easier to understand how all this tension and dysfunction made its way into the Get Back sessions, which, as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, was described as extremely acrimonious in director Michael Lindsay Hogg's Wikipedia bio. Then we have the famous power struggle between Billy wanting his father-in-law, Lee Eastman, to run the band's business affairs, while the other three Beatles opted for Alan Klein. Then, in September of 1969, only 8 months after completing the Let It Be sessions, Lennon informs his bandmates he's leaving the group. Billy follows with his own announcement in April 1970, less than a year and a half after the Let It Be sessions concluded, that he too was no longer working with the band. Then a string of legal disputes ensued, and dissolution of the Beatles was not formalized until December 1974. So we need to ask ourselves, does this sound like a happy period for the Beatles? Is the tension and apathy captured in the original Let It Be film an anomaly? Was it just a bad month for the lads that happened to be documented? Or was Let It Be a glimpse into the hard truth of what was really going on with the band behind closed doors? And if there was 56 hours of uplifting, backslapping footage, why were those moments not included in the original film? Let's keep this question in mind as we move along. But before I conclude with the breakup, let's listen to an excerpt from Billy's interview with Bernie Goldberg.
Give me a short version, if you would, Paul, about the breakup. How did it happen?
We'd been together like 10 years, and during the making of the White Album, things started to get a little bit edgy. In fact, during the making of Sgt. Pepper, George hadn't showed for most of the album.
During the making of Sgt. Pepper, George hadn't showed for most of the album.
Which was unusual, because we normally showed for our recording sessions. George hasn't been too interested in making that album. I think he was building a swimming pool. And it was just all a little bit like that. And of course, I was sort of thinking, thought, well, I won't say anything. But it's a bit dodgy. We went on to make the White Album, and things really did start to kind of disintegrate a little bit. And eventually, when Alan Klein came in, I think he was the final straw. He got a meeting with John and Yoko the night before we were due to have a big sort of State of the Nation meeting. And John and Yoko arrived the next day, and John issued a statement saying, all my affairs are now in the hands of Alan Klein. Everything I do must go through him. And we were due to sign a deal with Capitol Records, which was what we were all there for, this meeting. And Klein apparently had said to John, look, don't say anything. John had expressed his desire to, like, leave the group. And Klein, being a businessman, had said, don't say anything till after they've signed the new Capitol deal, which he was involved with. I'd been arguing for weeks about his percentage and stuff. I figured we were a big act. We could give him 15%. The others were saying, no, he's got to have 20. I said, we're a big act, guys. Real big group. He'll take 15. Don't you worry. They said, no way. Anyway, so John was at that meeting, and he just suddenly let it out. He just looked at us all. We were sitting around like this, and John just said, I wasn't going to tell you till after you signed the Capitol deal. He said, but I'm leaving the group. And he just looked at us, and our jaws just fell. And we all went kind of white. And he said, it's kind of a great feeling, telling you. It's kind of an adrenaline rush. He said, it's like, you know, telling someone you're getting divorced. He said, it's kind of, a little bit weird, but I'm leaving the group.
Another clue into the tension within the band is reflected in no uncertain terms in John Lennon's song, How Do You Sleep, from John's 1971 Imagine album. Even Wikipedia describes the song as making, quote, angry and scathing remarks aimed at his former Beatles bandmate and songwriting partner, Paul McCartney. And the song is a doozy. Lennon goes for the jugular, and in my opinion, the song is by far the most obvious Paul is Dead song ever written. The clues are barely disguised. I will flash up the lyrics so you can read them for yourself. John finished up recording How Do You Sleep on July 5th, 1971, which was only 2.5 years after the filming of Let It Be wrapped up. So we can see the animosity is still there, lending credence to the theory that not all was well in the Beatle camp. So where's the love? John released Imagine, and thus How Do You Sleep, on September 9th, 1971, which I believe is Billy's birthday. The date of September 9th, 1971 regroups to 999, and 999 reduces to the number 9. We get this by multiplying 3 times 9, which equals 27, and 2 plus 7 equals 9. I should also note the first edition of Memoirs, the Beatles Rock Band, and the Beatles Past Masters CD set were all released on September 9th as well back in 2009, and the date regroups to 999, 9, 9/11, and 11. Please pause the video if you are interested in seeing the calculations on the slide. Some of the musicians joining John on the song were George Harrison, Klaus Voormann, Nicky Hopkins, who played the piano on Revolution, and Alan White on drums. For anyone still not convinced about how John was feeling at the time when he wrote and recorded How Do You Sleep, let's take a listen to this outtake from a rehearsal.
Those streaks was white when they said you was dead. Oh, how do you sleep, you cunt? Okay, stop.
Two other songs, which are not flattering of Billy and indicative of the other 3 Beatles' feelings toward him, were both recorded by Ringo. In Memoirs, we are told Billy liked boogaloo music and the other Beatles would call him Boogaloo. Boogaloo is a genre of Latin music influenced by soul and rhythm and blues, which was popular in the United States in the 1960s and originated in New York City. The way to understand the song is to replace the word boogaloo with Billy, and thus Ringo is singing Back Off Billy. Also notice the record sleeve with Frankenstein smoking with his chained left hand. Ringo is dropping a clue that Billy with his surgeries and cosmetics was created, and his chained left hand symbolizes Billy's attachment to the Paul McCartney character, and as we know, Bio Paul was left-handed. Another Ringo song which was actually written by John Lennon and appeared on Ringo's 1973 self-titled album is I'm the Greatest. John, George, and Ringo played on the song with Klaus Voormann doing the bass work. The Wikipedia explanation of the song and its meaning is way off and borders on comical. The song is another example of Lennon taking Billy to task with lyrics like, "Yes, my name is Billy Shears, you know it has been for so many years, now I'm only 32, and all I want to do is boogaloo." So here we have the boogaloo clue once again. When John points to being only 32, aside from rhyming with boogaloo, I believe he is pointing back to 1969 when Billy was 32 years old and when the Beatles were at the height of the tension within the band. At the very end of the song, Ringo sings, "I'm the greatest in this world, in the next world, and in any world," which is a reference to both Billy's ego and his occultism and magic. So here we have two more songs expressing lingering issues between Billy and the other three Beatles, and these songs were released 3 to 4 years after the filming of Let It Be back in January of 1969. To me, this all points back to a time when the dynamics between the band, especially between Billy and his bandmates, were not overly positive. The 5-minute promo Peter Jackson released a while back, along with the media coverage coming out about the Get Back film, attempts to paint a jovial and happy period for the Beatles, which is at odds with the actual historical record. The timeline between 1967 through at least 1974 was not a period of détente for the Beatles. It was a time of conflict involving personalities and struggles pertaining to the band's direction that had the Beatles, in particular John, George, and ultimately Billy, looking for the exit door. And a good question to ask at this point is, why is history being revised? There are a number of reasons, ranging from making a ton of money, which this documentary will do, to buffing up the Beatles and thus Billy's legacy as he prepares to head out and ride into the sunset. I will offer more of my thoughts on why this is being done at the conclusion of the presentation. Let's now take a look at the Get Back promo Peter Jackson released a while back, and then I will take you through some insights I received from a source who is very familiar with advanced film and movie technology and examined the promo clip. Let's take a look.
Morning, everybody. Another bright day. Morning, camera.
Beatle George Harrison, above, is due in court here today to answer assault charges. Harrison is accused of assaulting the photographer last May as he and Beatle Ringo Starr left a nightclub. Hey! Wearing raincoats, standing so low in the sun. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4.
Go on, Al.
What? You what?
Go on, Al. That's the...
Well, don't interrupt stars when they're recording.
Hey.
We're bloody stars, you know.
Well, don't come in.
Cheek. And now your host for this evening, the Bottles.
Soldier was a man. A bit faster, do you think? A bit faster.
1, 2, 3, 4. How do you sleep, you cunt? Okay, stop.
The first thing I noticed is the quantum leap in definition and quality of Jackson's Get Back clip over the original Let It Be film. The original footage was not crisp, it lacked resolution, with many parts of the movie being poorly lit and dark. On the left is a capture from the original film. Notice how John is almost obscured by the poor lighting and how Billy, in the orange shirt, looks almost washed out. Then look at the capture on the right taken from Jackson's promo clip. Now we have a high-definition image with impressive clarity. For example, compare Billy's orange shirt on the right to what we see on the left. The difference in quality is almost too good to believe. It is literally night and day. Here's another comparison where I tried to compare two images that are similar. Again, notice the lack of clarity and color quality of the image on the left, which is from the original movie, and then look at the capture on the right. The question becomes, can the technology available today to a person of Peter Jackson's prominence in the film industry take source 16mm footage, which was dark and grainy, and transform it to the high-definition standards of today? And I'm going to assume Michael Lindsay Hogg used the same cameras and technology available to him in 1969 to film both the original film and the alleged, quote, unseen footage. It should also be noted that the audio from the original film had a considerable level of noise and hiss which would need to be cleaned up. Now let's take a moment and run two snippets from Jackson's promo video where the camera work, in particular the panning effects, were nowhere to be found in the original film. So are we to believe that Michael Lindsay Hogg only used this panning and sweeping technique for the, quote, unseen footage? Being such a great visual effect, why was it not used at all in the original film? Again, these are just my thoughts. Now let's read the input I received about this promo clip from a source that examined the video and is knowledgeable in modern film technology. After Peter Jackson released the Get Back promo clip, a person very knowledgeable in film technology reached out to me, unsolicited, to offer their insights on Jackson's video. Here's what they had to say about Jackson's promo. The link to the video is in the description box below. Quote, letting the most accomplished fairy tale filmmaker, Jackson, produce a, quote, real-life documentary carries a large suspicion. After watching the little clip, my first question is, how is there 56 hours of unseen footage? The term, quote, before unseen should raise a red flag. Who has never taken the time to look at these film reels in 50 years? Then there is image quality. This looks like modern 720p or 1080p HD or even 4K video with a 16mm effect sauce. Definitely not 16mm stock. The press info reads, it has been shot 16mm, blown up to 35mm, and restored. Yes, but 400 ISO film resolution noise cannot be deleted by simply blowing up to 35mm. Lost shadow detail by lack of light cannot be dialed back in by, quote, restoring. If the emulsion doesn't contain the information, it is simply not there. They brought back contrast like impossible. There is a lot that can be done nowadays in bringing back completely out-of-focus images into super sharp images. Post-edit color balancing, shifting or replacement, image stabilizing, green screen effects, all is possible. There is a whole lot that modern-day computer render farms can do, especially by someone with the clout of Peter Jackson. I am most aware of what is possible with deep fake technology. I bet Jackson can bring back my deceased grandmother in 4K, 60 frames per second quality in super surround sound. When you look at this clip with a woke eye, it does not feel right. It feels like a Fast and Furious production of The French Connection. It isn't organic. It's all contrived and so very much staged. The whole Jackson presentation is also contrived. It screams at the viewer, look, we are editing original Beatles material. He is trying too hard to convince us that this is not staged. Most people won't recognize manipulated imagery. This holds true, especially in current times. Now let's learn a little more about Peter Jackson. So Peter Jackson is Sir Peter Jackson, which means he has been knighted, and he has also been recognized with 2 New Zealand royal honors. Peter was the director, writer, and producer of the Lord of the Rings trilogy, as well as the Hobbit trilogy. He is the 3rd highest grossing film director of all time, and he has a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. On January 30th, 2019, which was the 50th anniversary of the Beatles' rooftop concert, Jackson announced his new endeavor would be a documentary about the making of the Beatles' final album, Let It Be. The documentary will be built around 55 hours of, quote, unseen footage, or 56 or 60 hours depending on the source, and 140 hours of audio, or 120 or 150 hours, again, depending on the source, that was made available to Jackson's team. And then Wikipedia states the content is the only footage of any note that documents the Beatles at work in the studio. Now let's pause for a second and think about what we're being told. The most famous, iconic rock band of all time has no other footage of them working in the studio. So from 1962 up to the Beatles' arrival to do Let It Be in January 1969, there is no other footage of note of the lads working and recording in the studio. No one thought to pick up a camera and film them recording anything in the studio until Let It Be? The entire premise is mind-boggling and difficult to believe. Maybe it's because if they did have footage, it would show Vic Flick laying down the guitar tracks and Bernard Purdie behind the drum kit. Then the article tells us the documentary will transform the footage with modern production techniques and seeks to display a new side of a period in the Beatles' history usually remembered as highly conflictual. Perhaps that's because it was highly conflictual. The article continues by saying most of the used footage was originally recorded for the 1970 Let It Be documentary. Notice it does not say all of the footage. So if it's not all of the footage from Michael Lindsay Hogg's efforts, then where did the additional footage come from? Inquiring minds want to know. Peter Jackson was interviewed by GQ magazine in July of 2021. The link to the interview is in the description box below. GQ asked Peter the following question. What was the original brief? Did Apple basically ask you to make the Beatles look like they liked each other? And Jackson responded with, I wasn't given any brief really. I was in a meeting with Apple because they had heard I was interested in doing a lot of experiments with artificial intelligence. They were thinking of doing some kind of traveling Beatles exhibition, which is no longer happening, I don't think. I asked them what happened to all the rushes, a rush is the raw footage, from Let It Be, and couldn't we utilize some of that in the exhibition? They said they didn't want to use any, as they were thinking of making a documentary using the outtakes. And so I said, if you're looking for someone to do that, I'd be interested. So I asked to see the raw footage, and I was hooked immediately. Growing up as a Beatles fan, I had the perception of it being a completely miserable period of time and thought that if Let It Be used the best bits, then the rest of it must be awful. I took the raw footage back home here to New Zealand on an iPad, and I phoned them up and said, yep, I'm in. We've been editing this series for about 2 years now, and it's the longest editing I've ever done in my career. I mean, you normally edit a movie like a Lord of the Rings type in about 3 or 4 months, but this has been 2 years. It's a very complicated thing to cut. So let this sink in a bit. The editing for Get Back took 7 to 8 times longer than a movie like Lord of the Rings. Also, GQ does not follow up on the artificial intelligence comment, which is amazing. Why didn't the interviewer ask, did you use AI technology in Get Back? And if you did, how was it used? Did you recreate scenes? Were there any areas where you applied AI to enhance the story? These would have been legitimate follow-up questions to ask. And then the GQ interviewer comments that we've always been led to believe the sessions were unbearable. Peter says, the moment when George is arguing with Paul, which you see in the original film, is actually the worst of it. You know, when George says, I'll play whatever you want me to play, or I won't play at all if you don't want me to play. You know, I'll do anything to please you sort of thing. I've tried to use nothing at all from Let It Be, so Get Back is completely different. I didn't want to usurp the original film, so this is a companion piece. But the one area we did break that rule is that little exchange between Paul and George, because I didn't want to be accused of sanitizing the films by not having that, because that's the bit everyone remembers. But we've given people the context for the interaction by showing the full 6-minute conversation. And there's the number 6 again. It no longer feels like an argument. It no longer feels like Paul is getting on George's nerves. You understand what Paul is trying to achieve. You understand where George is coming from. And the whole thing actually makes sense. Okay, so let me comment here. Anyone listening to the original dialogue can easily tell Billy and George had a terse exchange. We hear Billy say, "I'm trying to help you, but I always hear myself annoying you," which tells us that this kind of conversation has happened before. The fact is, there was tension between George and Billy, and they had an argument that was captured on film. Jackson continues by saying, the thing is, when the film was released, the Beatles were breaking up, but they weren't breaking up when they were making Let It Be, which was recorded a year earlier. So I suppose it would have been odd to release a film where they are all enjoying each other's company. Well, I beg to differ, Peter. I have shown that the tension within the band started during the Sgt. Pepper sessions, and we have Billy telling us that George's attendance during the Pepper sessions was spotty. That led to the White Album sessions, where we had Ringo and George Martin walk out. Then we get to Let It Be in January 1969, and I think I have presented plenty of evidence that the sessions were not a positive experience. In fact, George left for 5 days after the argument with Billy, and then in September 1969, only 8 months after the rooftop concert, John announced he was leaving the band. I would argue the Beatles broke up, at least mentally, before they ever stepped foot into the studio to film Let It Be. So as a sanity check, let's get a feel for what George and John actually thought of the sessions. This information was sourced from Wikipedia's article on the original Let It Be movie. The cold and austere conditions of Twickenham, along with nearly constant filming and sessions starting much earlier than the Beatles' preferred schedule, constrained creativity and exasperated tensions within the group. The sessions were later described by Harrison as, quote, the low of all time, and by John Lennon as, quote, hell, the most miserable sessions on earth. So there you have it, from George and John. Regardless of how this moment in history is now being spun, the Let It Be sessions were not an upbeat experience for the lads. Now, I would like to cover the concept of two sets of footage which diametrically oppose each other. On one hand, we have the original film showing a band that had cracks in the wall and nearing the end of their tenure. And on the other hand, we are now told there is 56 hours of unseen footage which depicts a happier and more positive experience. So I think it's reasonable to assume, if the 56 hours story is true, that there was a decision made by Apple and the Beatles back in 1969 to go with a film that reflects acrimony, conflicts, and apathy with the occasional light moment, instead of releasing a film portraying the Beatles and the sessions in a much more positive light. So let's create what that meeting might have been like. Good morning, everyone. Didn't expect to see you here so early, Ringo. We have a decision to make today. As you can see, there are 2 reels of film on the table. The first reel contains 56 hours of all the happy and positive moments we captured during the sessions, and the second reel, well, it contains all the tense, terse, and, how do I say this, the not-so-positive moments that took place. So Neil and Derek thought we should put this to a vote to decide which version of the film goes out. So, all those in favor of releasing a positive and uplifting film, please raise your hand. Anyone? No. Okay. All those in favor of releasing a not-so-positive film? You know, the more realistic version? Okay, so the negatives have it. So we'll go with the Debbie Downer version of the film. Thanks everyone for coming on short notice, and would someone please help Ringo out? Help him back into the chair? Thank you, Mel. I'm obviously having fun pointing out the obvious. If there were two versions of Let It Be, and one version portrayed the Beatles in a positive light, then why was the original version, with its subdued representation of the sessions, why was that released instead? Maybe, just maybe, it's because the happier version of the sessions doesn't really exist, and it was created. Now let's take a look at some examples of video and film technology that can alter perceptions. A couple of weeks ago, I uploaded an example of how film technology can create scenes which look lifelike. The example I used was a 2009 commercial for the Beatles rock band music video game. I originally referred to the technology being used in the commercial as deep fake, but an astute subscriber commented that the commercial was actually created using CGI, and added it was a very good application of CGI. However, the point of the video, if we set aside the technology for a moment, is the ability of the film and video industry to create scenes which appear real, especially to an audience that is unaware of what to look for. Most people have no understanding of the technology and simply sit back and enjoy the presentation. This then creates visual impressions, also known as impression magic, that the mind absorbs, and now the viewer is primed to enter into an imaginary virtual world. Most people watching the rock band video will understand the scenes in the commercial never existed. But what the commercial is looking to do is to sell you on a product by presenting a pleasant visual experience in hopes of shaping your perceptions. Imagery which is perceived as happy and uplifting increases the odds of the mind relating to and accepting the message. In a moment, I'm going to play the rock band commercial, and as you watch it, keep in mind that the technology used to create the clip is from 12 years ago. And then think about how much film technology has advanced since 2009. Also, at the end of the commercial, note the release date of the Beatles rock band, which was September 9th, 2009, or 999, which also regroups to 9/11. Let's take a look. So what exactly is deep fake technology? From Wikipedia, deep fakes are synthetic media in which a person in an existing image or video is replaced with someone else's likeness. While the act of faking content is not new, deep fakes leverage powerful techniques from machine learning and artificial intelligence to manipulate or generate visual and audio content with a high potential to deceive. And then from Springboard.com, a deepfake is an image, video, or audio track that has been manipulated using deep learning to mimic another person's speech or likeness. This type of image-to-image translation can replace faces, manipulate facial expressions, and even synthesize faces and speech. The simplest iteration of image-to-image translation is face swapping, as seen in Snapchat filters, where one person's face is transposed onto that of another person or animal for comic effect. Given a large enough data set, however, an unsupervised machine learning algorithm can generate a deep fake which does a far more believable job of synthesizing images to mimic someone's mannerisms. To get a feel for how realistic this technology can be, I'm going to play some deep fake clips. The first one is from a TikTok account called Deep Tom Cruise, where we think we are watching Cruise, but it's not him. The clips from this TikTok site are very impressive. Then I will play a short clip from the YouTube channel Control-Shift-Face showing Jim Carrey replacing Jack Nicholson in the movie The Shining. Links to both of these channels are in the description box below.
What's up, TikTok? You guys cool if I play some sports? I love it. More for the audio experience as much as the momentum. Hey, listen up, sports and TikTok fans. If you like what you're seeing, just wait till what's coming next. I'm gonna show you some magic. It's the real thing. I mean, it's all the real thing.
Most watching this presentation are aware of Billy's Find My Way video with Beck, whose real name is Beck David Campbell, who is a Scientologist. The video is loaded up with occult symbolism, including the door numbers, magician hand gestures, black and white duality, references to the light or Lucifer, and of course, the reveal at the end of the video when Beck takes the mask off to show us he is not Paul McCartney, but an illusion. Aside from the occult content contained in Billy's videos these days, Find My Way is notable because it illustrates what is possible with the current state of film and video technology. From NME.com, Find My Way Visuals sees a digitally de-aged McCartney dance the halls of a hotel before being transported to various other locations. The video was directed by Andrew Donahoe and co-produced with Hyperreal Digital, which specializes in the creation of hyper-realistic digital avatars. Hyperreal's CEO, Remington Scott, tells us the technology to de-age talent and have them perform in creative environments like that is now fully realized, even with one of the most recognized faces in the world. From Hyperreal's website, we are told the hypermodel is a hyper-realistic digital human avatar that can be any age, speak any language, and perform in any current or future digital media environment, including film, TV, video games, etc. So as we can see, film and video technology has taken a quantum leap forward and is already in a position to blur the lines between what is real and what is not. Now let's take a look at some concert footage of Billy where things get a little strange. A colleague of mine who researches the Beatles conspiracy sent me a video of Billy, aka Paul McCartney, playing a live version of the song House of Wax. And what caught our attention is one version of the video has Billy looking a lot like his son James. Now, I don't know if this was done by someone on a lark, but the fake is pretty good and another example of an illusion coming to life. Let's take a look.
The house of wax, poets spill out on the street to tell of it's the house of wax, poets spill out on the street.
This slide shows James McCartney on the left and far right, and then 3 screen captures in between from the video I suspect was altered. We can see Billy's hair is more red, his complexion is lighter, and it appears his face has been made to look younger. Below the 3 center images is a capture of Billy from the second video for reference and comparison. Let me know what you think in the comments section below. Now let's circle back to Peter Jackson and get back. Variety ran an article back in December 2020 outright telling us that Peter Jackson is rewriting the ending of rock's greatest fairy tale. I found the phrase fairy tale to be an interesting choice of words. The article tells us, in a brilliant move, the Beatles hired a man who knows how to create a climatic finale. Lord of the Rings maestro Peter Jackson whose most recent project was They Shall Not Grow Old, a fascinating World War I documentary built around meticulously restored 100-year-old footage. They set him to work on the 56 hours of 50-year-old Let It Be tapes, and judging by the 5-minute preview he dropped yesterday, the results are astonishing. It's been a long time since we've been totally jaw-droppingly surprised by any, quote, new Beatles anything, but judging by the preview, Get Back is the final frontier. The article continues by saying, the original Let It Be is a downer. We see our beloved Beatles breaking up before our eyes. We see the group, who had finished recording the 30-song White Album just 6 weeks earlier, miserably trying to have a jolly old time working up even more tunes for the cameras in the morning in a dark and cavernous film studio during a typically gloomy English winter. We see Paul and George arguing, John and Yoko wafting in from a heroin haze, and Paul trying to liven the tepid sessions by taking the helm. Instead, he comes off dictatorial, while Ringo looks on dejectedly. Let It Be was not intended to be an epitaph, but as the group broke up while the film was being completed, that became the after-fact narrative. Naturally, the sound and visuals are approximately 3 times as bright as the original film. The audio was cleaner and more pastel-colored than the murky browns and blacks of Let It Be. But most remarkably, the mood is 3 times brighter as well. Get Back is a counter-narrative to the glum Let It Be, an alternate history that makes you question what you thought about the original. Going back to when I discussed the Beatles Rock Band video game, I said what the commercial was looking to do is to sell you on a product by presenting a pleasant visual experience in hopes of shaping your perceptions. Imagery which is perceived as happy and uplifting increases the odds of the mind relating to and accepting the message. This is exactly what Jackson's Get Back is doing. Peter Jackson was hired to create what Variety so aptly refers to as an alternate history that makes you question what you thought about the original. In other words, Jackson was hired to rewrite a part of Beatle history that didn't have the luster and shine a Cinderella story is supposed to have. But the question becomes, who is behind this rewrite and what is there to be gained? I believe the person behind the project is Billy, in collaboration of course with Apple, to pump up a low point in the Beatles story with the help of illusion magic to rake in a stack of money. Now let's talk a little about rewriting history. For those that follow my work, we know that Billy can be a little loose with history when it comes to his telling of Beatles stories, especially those moments in time during the biological Paul period. In Memoirs, Billy tells us in the beginning he worked to nail down historical facts pertaining to Paul's time with the band because he didn't want to get tripped up and didn't want to find himself in an awkward situation. But of course, no one can memorize every detail of every moment in time, and so when people asked him about something he wasn't sure about or didn't know, he would create his own backstories once he realized no one questioned or challenged his responses. Reporters and interviewers just ran with what he gave them. This, of course, put Billy in the driver's seat to create backstories which over time established a narrative that may or may not be historically accurate. What Memoirs tells us is supported by a comment Philip Norman made about Billy back in 1987. Norman is an English author, novelist, journalist, and playwright. He is best known for his biographies of the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, Buddy Holly, and Elton John. His other books include similar studies of John Lennon, Mick Jagger, Paul McCartney, and Eric Clapton. Norman was interviewed in 1987 for a feature on George Harrison on the show West 57th Street, during which he stated that Harrison's view of the Beatles' history was the only reliable first-hand account given Lennon's death 7 years before. When asked for an explanation, Norman said that McCartney, quote, rewrites history all the time, and Ringo Starr was unable to remember. Quote, he doesn't know. He drank, he smoked the joints, he had the girls, and he drummed the drums. That was Ringo. Here's the clip from the interview. The link to the entire West 57th Street piece is in the description box below. Let's take a listen.
Welcome to West 57th. There's never been anything like the Beatles. John, Paul, George, and Ringo were the most popular band in history. George Harrison, the youngest, was always the most uncomfortable with the Beatles' extraordinary celebrity, and after it was over, his withdrawal was the most painful. They broke up nearly 20 years ago, but their records continue to sell, more than 1 billion, that's billion, so far. They never reunited, rarely talked about what it was like, but this week, 7 years after John Lennon's death, George Harrison remembers.
Are you ready? Let me say it first. You repeat it after me. John. Paul. George. Ringo. I give you the one and only fabulous Beatles.
It just annoyed me that people got so into the Beatles, 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 Beatles. It's not that I don't like talking about them. I'd never stop talking about them. It's Beatles, there's Beatles, Beatle, 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 Beatle. In the end, it's like, oh, sod off with the Beatles, you know. I mean, screaming crowds everywhere you go, pressman at your door for years on end, the front cover of every newspaper every day of the week for years. Prying, you know, everywhere you go, trying to find out any little bit of dirt that they can write about you.
You said at one stage that the Beatles were a curse as far as you were concerned. What you're saying is the same thing right now.
It's a lot to deal with. And that's the thing, the Beatles sort of did haunt a lot of us for years, and still do.
Hang on, George, just look to me for a second. That's great.
George Harrison has always struggled with his fame.
Your hair looks great.
Although he says he loathes being in the public eye, he has emerged from a self-imposed exile to promote his first album in 5 years.
Don't do that to me. No chewing.
Since the bitter breakup of the Beatles 18 years ago, this deeply private man has been divorced, remarried, and some say hiding behind the secure walls of his country estate outside London.
Great, George.
While managing on his own to record 8 gold albums in the 70s and launch a respected film company, Harrison has avoided any discussion of the Fab Four until now. He admits he's finally recovered from the ordeal of being George Harrison, the Beatle.
I had no ambition when I was a kid, other than to play a guitar and get in a rock and roll band. And I don't really like to be the guy in the white suit at the front. Like in the Beatles, I was the one who kept quiet and at the back and let the other egos be at the front.
When he was a small boy, he told his mother not to talk about him to the other mothers. He didn't want nosy mothers knowing about him. Well, of course, for someone private to become one of the Beatles, I mean, it was a fairly heavy psychological disaster.
Philip Norman is the author of Shout, which many consider the definitive Beatles biography.
The Beatles is not a normal story. It's a supernatural story.
It's a supernatural story.
And the pressure was supernatural, and it required supernatural luck and forbearance to recover from it. And he has recovered from it. He's the one that we're going to have to ask about the Beatles. There's no one else to ask now, because McCartney won't tell you. Ringo can't tell you. John isn't here.
When you say Paul won't tell you, what do you mean?
He rewrites history all the time.
He rewrites history all the time.
And Ringo can't tell you because...
He doesn't know.
He doesn't know?
No, he just, he drank the drink, he smoked the joints, he had the girls, and he drummed the drums. That was Ringo.
Billy's disclosure officially began around 2006 with I Am a Phony's Rotten Apple series, which some researchers believe Neil Aspinall was behind. Neil passed away in 2008. Going into 2009, we have the release of the first edition of Memoirs, the Beatles Rock Band video game, and the Past Masters CD set, all of which were released on September 9th, 2009, a date which regroups to 999, 666, 911, 9, and 11, all occulted numbers. Since 2009, we have Billy doing interviews and touring with endless news feeds about everything McCartney. In September 2018, he released Egypt Station, replete with album art loaded up with Egyptian symbolism, which no doubt was a nod to Aleister Crowley, who I'm pretty sure was his biological father. In 2019, the film Yesterday was released with all its embedded Paul is Dead clues. In December 2020, Billy released McCartney 3, an album loaded up with occult symbolism and numerology, which appears to be pointing to his departure in the not-so-distant future. On page 13 of the second edition of the Memoirs of Billy Shears, we are given the date of February 21st, 2023 as a date when Billy is, quote, released from his obligation to play the McCartney role. The question becomes, what does release mean? Does it mean he simply retires, or does it mean it's when he passes away? In either case, the date, which is less than 2 years out, appears to coincide with the flurry of Beatle releases in the form of books, interviews, specials, and films we are currently seeing. We now have the new Memoirs box set being co-marketed with Billy's The Lyrics, with each book diametrically opposing the other with regard to the true story of the Beatles. Then we have the release of Hulu's McCartney 321, and now Get Back is scheduled for November of 2021. I was told a few years back that this was exactly what was going to happen. I was told there was a number of big projects underway that would be released as Billy's runway became shorter. Full disclosure, per Memoirs, won't happen until after Billy passes, and how soon afterward is anyone's guess. But the truth is, disclosure has already happened for those that are awake and not under the spell. In Billy's mind, he is the Beatles, because if it wasn't for him, the band would have ceased to exist at the end of 1966. I suspect that Billy's connections and contributions to the Beatles predates September 1966 and perhaps goes as far back as early 1962 and maybe even before that as a contributing songwriter and studio musician working with George Martin and possibly Theodore Adorno. Billy is the head priest of the cult of Paulism, with its legions of adoring fans making up the worldwide congregation. To millions of people, the Beatles are gods who are worshipped. Billy, the son of the magician, harnesses the spiritual and physical energy of this idolatry to create and manifest his reality of fame and fortune by having his external world mirror his true or pure will, which is a primary tenet and teaching of Luciferianism and of Crowley's religion of Thelema. The spiritual energy is harnessed by steering the thoughts and consciousness of the masses, which can be achieved by fans listening to the music, reading books, or by watching films and documentaries. The manipulation of your physical energy comes in the form of money or currency. To obtain money, you must work or exert energy, and then you take your money to buy Beatle and Billy merchandise. Money is an occult sigil, and the perpetual exchange makes it a very powerful occult tool that benefits the occultist. Billy's persistence and hard work on behalf of the Pyramid of Power is now being rewarded. Over the past 5 years, I have said he will go out with a ticker tape parade, and that is exactly what is happening. Notions of Billy being arrested for impersonating or deceiving are pipe dreams. Anyone hoping for this type of outcome will be extremely disappointed because this is not how the world really works. There is indeed a hidden hand at play, and Billy is part of that system. There is a power structure in place that creates, manipulates, and dictates your worldviews, your beliefs, and values. For so many people, their thoughts are not their own. And the Beatles, Billy, and the entire music and entertainment industry are there to shape and transform the collective mindset of society in accordance with the agenda of the social engineers. The official narrative around the Beatles is a Cinderella story, a fairy tale based in the occult that was written and presented to keep us entertained, to harness our energy, and to reshape the social dynamic of our reality. Throughout this presentation, I have shown how the original Let It Be sessions in 1969 were not a positive experience for the Beatles. In fact, the sessions were hindered by acrimony, conflict, apathy, and tension, and therefore the original film accurately captured the demise of the Beatles, with George Harrison describing the sessions as, quote, the low of all time, and John Lennon saying it was, quote, hell, the most miserable sessions on earth. The premise that there is 56 hours of, quote, unseen footage is highly suspect and stretches the boundaries of believability. The notion that Michael Lindsay Hogg, the Beatles, and Apple would have bypassed the upbeat and positive footage only to release a more stoic and disjointed version of the sessions makes no sense to me. Of course, every film has outtakes, but I seriously doubt the story of the 56 hours of never-before-seen footage. And as I mentioned before, it is about money, spells, and magic, and as the article from Variety stated, who better to spin that tale than the man behind Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit? And when we factor in how far film and video technology has advanced, along with Peter Jackson's interest in working with AI, I think we should be able to see where this plot is going. So remember, living is easy with eyes closed, misunderstanding all you see. Thanks for listening.
See through